The Minotaur Project by Eugene Sheely. Chapter 1. If you don't believe me, I wouldn't blame you. What intelligent person would take these stories at face value? I know I wouldn't have before it happened to me. I would assume that if someone were to read my writings, an event must have occurred in their life, prompting them to seek answers. Or perhaps the things I've written about have become mainstream and part of this is now common knowledge, and you're here conducting your proper research. You might be some half-witted snob, telling yourself you always knew deep down these things to be true because you possessed some superior insights. Bah! You're likely just an idiot like the rest of them. However, I do believe that some of you might have experienced proper pattern recognition and sensed that something was wrong. This most likely would have been simply intuition, not a conscious logical conclusion. No, that would have been a rare thing indeed, but not impossible. But yes, intuition. That's where most of us stood, but not in the supernatural sense. Intuition at its basic level is nothing but pattern recognition. It doesn't necessarily reveal the truth, but it's built from your understanding of the world and helps you make quick decisions based on patterns you've subconsciously learned. Have you ever heard stories, for example, of people who encountered a dangerous individual who turned out to be a serial killer? They might say something along the lines of, "He acted polite, but something was off." We've known how intuition works since at least the 80s. Researchers conducted studies on people by showing them a screen with flashing dots that seemed random but actually followed an algorithm too complex for the person to consciously understand. They asked the participants to predict where the dots would appear, and after a while, they were able to do so with surprising accuracy. However, when the algorithm was changed after their success, their ability vanished. This is where experts' predictions come from. Someone who has worked in a profession for 10 or 20 years can start making predictions as if they had a sixth sense. This used to have more of a mystique in older times when time moved more slowly, and the dots on your screen weren't rearranged by the relentless pace of innovation. Every person could aspire to be like Nestor, king of Pylos from the Iliad. Yes, he was old, and yes, he could no longer wield a sword in battle. But he had done it before, his whole life, and the war the youth were waging was no different from the one he had fought. His advice, drawn from victories and defeats, both his own and those of others he knew and heard stories about, was indispensable. But after the second half of the 20th century, the advice of the old man wasn't worth much, since he had lived in a different world, and the algorithm for the dots had changed. This is also the case with morality. Your sense of what is right and wrong is just the accumulation of stories and personal experiences. An American Mormon might see a man drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette and get a feeling of evil from him. The spirit is not with him, as they say, referring to the Holy Ghost. But show the same scene to an Italian, Frenchman, Arab, etc., and what do they experience? Pure bliss and happiness, for the smell, taste, and scene remind them of their father, uncles, brothers, and friends. They think to themselves, "He is safe." That same American Mormon can see a hamburger with a cold glass of Coca-Cola and their disgusting fry sauce, a combination of ketchup and mayo, and feel joy, for this is safe, this is home. But show that same hamburger to a Hindu man? He'll have the same reaction as the Mormon did to coffee and cigarettes. Your intuition can make you feel like you've discovered some objective, profound truth. But it's merely the most subjective of experiences when it comes to answering what is good and evil. Even the wisest philosophers were unable to grasp this truth, and all their rationality applied in the search for truth was merely rationalizing a belief system they had already formed and over which they had no control in shaping. A wasted life spent writing profound nonsense for clueless, educated fools to read and marvel at. But at the same time, my friends, it can reveal to you profound truths about the hidden mechanisms of our world if you spend enough time observing the dots and the hidden algorithm hasn't changed. To understand what I'm going to tell you about Project Minotaur, I need to provide some context. You're familiar with governments creating classified documents, which reveal what really happened in a given situation or the results of an investigation and their best guesses for its outcome. At the same time, these governments deceive the public and journalists by fabricating fictional stories. The purpose of these fictional stories is to influence society. For example, the Americans, Russians, Chinese, etc., may want a regime change in another country, so they send agents to actually carry it out and then fabricate a story about how democracy triumphed once their puppet government is established, and the public cheers. Are you following me so far? This means that these governments maintain a secret, hidden history with accurate records of the real events that took place, which they don't want to admit to the public and never release, despite laws mandating it. Now, you, being outside the club, might be reading the New York Times bestsellers, if you even read at all, which, despite historians' best efforts, will either be complete works of fiction or very superficial overviews of what happened. For example, a historian only has access to the public record, which mostly consists of the fictitious stories the government created, while the government possesses, at a minimum, records of every crucial conversation any important figure has during their time in office. This problem has always existed, but the divide has grown exponentially. The book The Prince by Machiavelli, for instance, was never intended to be published but rather to serve as a personal guide for one ruling family. There are entire libraries filled with hidden books like these, which the public will never have access to. Not that they would do much reading if they did. But even books that were once available to the public have disappeared. Don't believe me? Visit an average university and start picking up random books that aren't mainstream, then search for them on Amazon or any online bookstore, and you won't find them. Some don't even have a single Google result indicating their existence. Then, read the book and you'll likely come across some of the most insightful text you've ever encountered. Many of these disappearances are deliberate, but they generally happen due to a decay in society. Academic work used to be the realm of the brightest among us, but the noble ideals of the Enlightenment aimed to elevate the masses of humanity to new heights. However, the attempt to educate everyone, more or less equally through standardized education, simply had the effect of lowering education to the lowest level. If George Bush said, "No child left behind," and the goal was to achieve a higher completion rate for academics, but the current material was just too difficult for a segment of the population, how do you expect them to pass? It's not an education problem, it's an intelligence problem. Some people are simply incapable of grasping ideas once they reach a certain level of complexity. So, what do? Well, obviously, you dumb down the education to their level, declare everyone passed, and claim you've improved education as a result. What does this do to books? For a book to be understood, the reader needs to possess a certain level of intelligence and be able to grasp complex ideas, as well as have some previous knowledge relating to the book's content. A lawyer might be a smart person, but if they were to pick up a book on advanced physics, they'd be lost. The widespread practice of reading created a cap on the complexity of books for most readers, and since book publishing is a business, publishers maximize profit by providing dumbed-down books the majority can read. The same thing happened to search engines. Historians can no longer find the quality content that was available in the early days of the Internet. The algorithms now focus on maximizing profit, presenting safe content from a few big sources. Complicated SEO rules bury many smaller websites. You can't go past around 400 results because that would be too costly for the search engine companies, and so the wealth of knowledge was wiped out, as if it never existed. But all this I've said is simply to emphasize, you don't know much. I'm trying to make you realize the extreme level of ignorance we're in. At best, you're like a child saying, "My father is a doctor." What understanding does a child have of what a doctor is and does, beyond, he helps people? Now imagine the gap in knowledge and understanding between that child and an actual doctor. That's the best case scenario for you. Now to expand on this. You've most likely lived your entire life in civilization and at best camped and hiked in some safe, high-traffic areas. How many of you have actually lived in real wilderness for long periods of time? And I mean, you need to take up an airplane and be dropped off in the middle of nowhere since there are no roads. Wilderness. Have you ever looked at a map of the U.S. in reference to government-owned land? The feds own about 90% of Alaska, 85% of Nevada, 60% of Utah, over 50% of Oregon, Idaho, Arizona, 40 to 45% of California and Wyoming, New Mexico, Colorado, etc. Add to it state-owned land, and then privately owned land the public can't access, and what do you have? Most humanity is gated into small patches of developed land. Yes, most of it is rural, but this isn't real wilderness. So in a sense it can be said you're a caged animal. What you think is real, based on your experience, is similar to a pig kept in a pen who lacks no understanding of the greeted world as it blissfully rolls over the muck. You have heard about some of the creatures I'll mention but thought them to be fiction as you lived in your pen. Similar to a pig may live and die, oblivious of the existence of wolves. There are also entire civilizations that don't show up in the map, existing in parallel to ours. I do not claim to know it all, my dear brothers, but I'll do my best to explain what I do know. Some of the things I've witnessed, have read, or been told I can't make sense of, but I'll try to describe as best I can in that hopes that another more knowledgeable or talented writer can continue my work and perhaps figure it out.